wild and seemingly unrelated statistic. This is in the US, the average marriage lasts 8 years. So when you're thinking about your relationship with your investors, if you think your company's going to be around longer than 8 years,
Right.
there's a chance that your relationship with your investors could outlast your marriage.
Statistically speaking.
What
have I now? 36 years, so
36 years old.
in my marriage. You're married to your mother. Love you, Beth.
So
The point obviously is that you should be careful with regard to picking your investors, in particular, the investors who are on your board, because there are investors and there are investors, right? All animals are equal, just some animals are more equal than others. And so the people that sit on your board are very, very important relationships in terms of our ideal stakeholders. You are far better off being pretty thoughtful with regard to who you have as a board member, an investor and a board member, than not to state the obvious. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why some founders end up with, sort of the best they can get because they really want the money. We could probably go down a number of different rabbit holes in terms of the metaphors to go here. And if you can do it, and I would strongly suggest you should do everything you can to position yourself to be able to do this well, you should be very particular with regard to the investors that you bring on board, especially those who are going to be on your board, no pun intended. But even the investors who you don't bring on your board, I've seen many a founder deal with non-board investors who are really, a pain in their side. So generally speaking, you should be pretty thoughtful with regard to who you bring on as an investor, and in particular, who you bring on as an investor that's going to join your board. And, there's a lot of different things that you can take into consideration. Having sat on dozens of boards and been, the CEO with boards on numerous occasions, I still don't believe that I'm an expert on all of this. I have opinions, I have experiences, but I believe there are people who know this even better than I do. But I think when you're thinking about bringing on investors, in particular investors who are going to be on your board, you want to bring people that make your life easier, not more difficult, to state the obvious. And so there's a whole host of factors that goes into this. Are they bringing something to the table, as an example? Do they buy what you're doing? Do they deeply believe in what you're trying to do? Or are they just investing because they believe, it could be a good outcome for them? I think there are times when investors are attracted to the math of the business, but really haven't deeply thought through what you're really trying to do with the business. And so when that first moment, and it will happen, comes where there's tension, when there's stress, when things aren't going the way they were supposed to go, all of a sudden you start unpacking a bunch of stuff that you probably should have talked about before you ever took them on as an investor. So my personal bias is towards making sure that I've shared as much as I possibly can with prospective investors, that they understand where I'm coming from, where we're going, what I value, what I don't value. I'm probably guilty of being over-communicative and oversharing, because I do not want to end up in a wow, we're totally incompatible. What you want me to focus on, what you want our company to care about right now, is not what I want to focus or want to care about right now. If I had investors that wanted us to be generating, enormous profits right now when we have so much more to invest in, there would be major league tension. If you're fortunate, and I would argue that even if you're not so fortunate, you need to be really particular, I think, with regard to your investors, and especially the investors that end up on your board.
And to pull from the previous analogy, right? There's the element which we're not going to get into because then that's everything, right? Of putting yourself in the position to be fortunate,
Right.
right? Making yourself worthy of that relationship.
Success is, what luck is for those who have prepared to take advantage of it, right?
And it's the same thing. Like if you go and you just think that you deserve a great mate for no reason, right? You're not putting anything into it, and you're not putting yourself to be the person who deserves that thing. That's not going to go well for you.
Right.
Right. So it's the same dynamic there. But when you you are in the situation and you're trying to discern whether the relationship is good, sort of in the early stages of that relationship, what are the key things to look out for?
Let's just focus on what we talked about in last session or last, podcast, which is forever agreements, right? Do they buy into like what you view as the soul of this thing that you're building, right? If there's a fundamental disagreement on any of your forever agreements, that's probably not a small issue.
And that's something you should have thought through before you get into this room.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you don't go into the relationship to figure yourself out.
Lots of people go into relationships to figure themselves out.
Well, they don't go in with any thought, right?
Or not, right?
Yeah. Well, the same with the investors. Like if it looks good on paper it looks great, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't want to go right, if we're speaking to investors now, it's like you probably should do a little bit more digging to make sure that the soul looks good, the forever agreements are sound and in line with what you believe.
Yeah.
And the numbers look good.
Yeah. I mean, this seems like mom and apple pie, but you shouldn't be talking to investors unless you have a decent sense for what you're doing, right? How you're going to be the best at what you do, what the major guardrails and or North Stars or Northern Constellation is. Make sure that you're all aligned on that stuff because, the chances are that if it's a decent investor and you don't have these answers, you're going to fail the first interview with them, right? They're going to be like, what the heck, right? This is, I'm investing in some amateur. And it's interesting too, because, back to we almost always talk about stage of development. If you don't have a decent let's just say that, you start to work on your forever agreements, even, before you do any work. And then maybe you get into stage one and you're really proving product market fit. I think it's pretty dangerous is probably the right word. It's either dangerous or naive,
Reckless.
or reckless to be going out and raising money when you don't even know what the hell you're doing. That's just not right.
It happens.
Reckless is a good word, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that
and you're going to attract certain investors that aren't going to be, top tier, you could say,
right
with that sort of thing, right? So then now you're into a relationship with that, and that's not good for either party.
No, because you're now into a version of a marriage that's built on, nothing, right? Nothing concrete, nothing substantial. There's nothing that you can point to when you run into tension, and there will always, right, be moments where there's tension because there's no, world universe where you go from an idea to exit and it's all, roses and parades, and
you're more likely to run into tension and you're less well equipped to handle it when it comes.
yeah. And you don't even have frameworks to say, hey, I thought we talked about this, or hey, this is what, we've been working on. Hey, this is the agreements we've had, back to agreements-based relationships, right? And if they're right, and if they're decent humans, not all of them are.
Yeah.
Right. If they're decent humans, they'll say, you're right. And now you can have a healthier conversation then it's like, well, you never talked about this. You never said we were going to do this. You never said you cared about that. You never said any of these things. And now all of a sudden you're bringing these things up. And that's a hard playing field to be on when there's no fundamental set of rules or some set of understandings, or you don't even know whether you're playing pickleball or volleyball. I know I'm mixing metaphors all over the place.
My phrase, you don't know if you're playing pickleball or going skeet shooting. Like that's a bad one to mix up.
That's a bad one. I like that one even better.
Yeah, it's like you should know what you're doing. Don't show up to pickleball courts with a shotgun. I haven't done it, but I don't imagine it would go well. So we say investors are ideal stakeholders,
Yes.
right? It's not just
100%.
source of capital. A lot of people go into this and they're like, oh, we just need money. We need investors. And then that's the end of that thought,
Yeah.
right? That's how the relationship is viewed. But when we say ideal stakeholders, what do we mean by that?
So first of all, ideal stakeholders are stakeholders who we believe we can develop a high trust relationship with. Back to character, competency, and connection, right? So character-wise, that's pretty straightforward. When we're having a conversation, you're being genuine with me, or there's no hidden agendas, right? And what you say is what you do. Intent is clear. And so, we're not lying to each other and all that good stuff, right? So character's pretty straightforward. I'll pause. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Thank you. Competency, another really good one, right? So I'm competent, you're competent. We agree that each other is competent in our particular domains. And so you're competent as an investor. You're competent as a board member. Maybe you're not totally competent as a board member, but maybe you have a decent breadth of competencies that you'd like to see in a board member, right? Because no board member has all the competencies. Because you think about, in boards, a lot of times you'll have someone who's really good on the financial side, someone who's really good on the strategic side, maybe someone who's really good on the brand side, someone who's really good on the technology side, someone who's really good on where the industry is going, right? There's a bunch of different competencies that can be brought to the table. But generally speaking, each party is bringing a healthy level of competencies to that relationship, complementary competencies. Make sense? And then connection gets into that last section, which is, we're aligned on goals, we're aligned on values, we're aligned on what's important, we're aligned on what we're not going to worry about, plus or minus, this year, next year. We're aligned on, whether or not we're going to lose money for a year, for a couple of years. We're aligned on, just how we're pursuing the game that we're playing. We're aligned on strategy, right? And as I said earlier, we're aligned on forever agreements. And once again, I think I am certainly on one end of the continuum of making sure that we're all aligned across these three things. I think I probably have seen enough over my career where I think it's really good to talk about this stuff and to be transparent about it and to turn these things, expectations into agreements in terms of the core things that matter, versus I probably the average, person who goes out and raises money. But for me, I just, from an ideal stakeholder perspective, from a character competency and connection perspective, I'd rather over-communicate, overshare, make sure there's nothing major that is going to be problematic. And if there is something that's major problematic, I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I'm not going to make that trade. Some people will make that trade. I would super encourage people to not make that trade to the best they possibly can, because I think the probability that something is going to end up, creating a lot of issues is not immaterial.
It kind of leads to, there's a cost to taking money and signing up for that in a bad relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's metaphorically, it's like making a deal with the devil,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like you're going to sell your soul to the thing. And I don't think a lot of, you see that a lot in particularly movies around the mob.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, you get money from it and it's all good. And
Yeah.
you're stupid and you're young, whatever. And then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, and then they try to kill you. That's great, right? And then we have a whole movie. Right. Not that extreme.
Right.
Archetypally, it's pretty similar, right? We
Yeah.
see this in mythology. We see it in films, and it's right. It's the same thing of like, oh, you just really want money right now, and you're gonna be inauthentic, whatever, and deal with the people that know they can take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And there are people that know that game within the legal bounds fairly well.
Yes.
They're out there.
Yeah.
Have you seen that in your experiences investing in companies or coaching? Have you seen that people get taken advantage of strongly like that?
I mean, to the place where a board member encouraged the founder, CEO, to go do a bunch of stuff. so that ultimately the founder CEO, not doing bad stuff, just going and I'm trying to remember the use case here, but where they were encouraged to pursue a component of the strategy where the board member knew they'd trip up, and then the board member came in and swooped up the entire company and took it over.
Seems pretty realistic.
I mean, this.
It seems like that might happen.
I know the founder,
Yeah.
right? And then the stories about so now once you realize the devil's on the other side of the table, right? Now all of a sudden, you find yourself in this really bad position, and the devil has, a bunch of stuff, including the devil now has been working, the back channels with the other board members and painting you in a bad light. And it's just like someone, it's a horrible, so I'm trying not to use the expression, but, when did you stop, beating your children, right? You can't answer that one in any way because the implication is you beat your children, right? You say, well, I don't beat my children. Well, he just said you do, right? And so now all of a sudden you can't, it's hard to refute all that. So the founder ends up getting themselves into a pickle. And then of course, if the other board member gets the entire board members to sort of side with them, and now all of a sudden you don't even have the company to rely on, right, to support you in refuting the accusations, which are not even, they're trumped up so that the board member can end up owning your company. And so, you can't even rely on your own company to back you. And it's your company, right? So yeah, I know of situations where it gets, you basically, because all of a sudden one day the board member woke up and was like, whoa, this actually is huge, right? This isn't just a $5 million or a $10 million opportunity. This is a $1 billion opportunity. And greed settles in, and now the question is, and I didn't have enough time to really get into all the details with this one founder, but, could the founder have done more research about this individual to see whether or not their corpse trailed behind him in his career? And, my gut is, there probably are some bad stories back in the history there, because this isn't something, that just all of a sudden materializes with a young board member. It's probably someone who's got some years behind him. And, then you can get in a whole conversation around, is this person ultimately a sociopath or a psychopath, right, on your board? At the risk of stating the obvious, I would avoid putting sociopaths and psychopaths on your board. Period. End of discussion.
It's a very wise point you just created. Yeah. So if you are in a situation where, maybe you like the investor, like the investing firm,
Right.
and the person they put on your board, right, you get the sense that they're a bit of a parasite. It's
Right.
infecting the system.
Yeah.
What do you do in that situation? Right, because you don't want it to get out of hand where it's, right, infecting the rest of the board and the company.
This is such a very specific use case, and you'd really want to get into all the details. But sometimes maybe it's a junior person. You can go talk to the senior partner and just say, hey, can you help me figure out how to do a better job of managing my relationship with Joe, right? And if you were going to go there and you didn't think Joe was a sociopath or a psychopath, as an example, you say, hey, Joe, you got an issue here, right? Because do you tell Joe you want to have the conversation, or do you go over Joe's head, right? You go over Joe's head, Joe's going to find out about it. Now you've hurt your relationship even further, right? So there's a dance that needs to be played here. And, I would advise, someone who's in this particular situation to, talk to someone who's pretty experienced about how to best navigate this, because there's a lot of facts that are going to play into what's the smartest thing to do in order to see if you can't make that relationship, healthy again. It's unfortunate when you start to go down a path like that, because for the most part, my experience has been that it's hard to reverse when a relationship sort of dips below a certain level. And, it's just hard. You want to, once again, in the very beginning, make sure that, you've chosen a partner, partner, a firm, a board member that, plus or minus, there's a pretty darn good chance is going to be a good partner, for a long period of time. You may say, hey, I'm going to go into this, back to the marriage, in 8 years. I'm going to go into this and it's 3 to 4 years and then we're going to have an exit. Well, we've talked about this in founders mode. If I would not play that game, right? Maybe you have a brilliant strategy that includes already understanding the exit, and you know exactly what you need to do to get from here to there, and you're highly confident you can get this done in 3 years. And I've seen this on numerous occasions where people, like, they have a very specific game they're playing and a very specific strategy, and they're just going to boom, 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 boom. And if they're boom, 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 and they're advancing in the way they thought they were going to advance, it's all going to be fine. Right. And yeah, it's a 3-year relationship, and maybe, you took a little bit of risk with that particular firm, but the probability was very low that it was going to be an 8-year relationship. That's the outlier, in my opinion, based upon everything I've experienced in my career. I think you need to be going into any of these things saying to yourself, what happens if this is a 10-year relationship? Right? Am I confident that I can be with this group of people, with this group of investors, or with this particular investor and this particular board member? What's my level of confidence that that we can do this and have a decent relationship for the next 10 years? Because, the economic cycle historically has been plus or minus 10 years, and there's 2 years that are great to be doing a transaction. There are 2 years that are horrible to be doing a transaction. I mean, there's no market, there's no appetite for risk. And then you got, 4 to 6 years that's in the middle. And so, sometimes you just can't control the things that are, the marketplace, the economy, et cetera. And so sometimes, you are sitting there for 10 years. Now the question is, is this a good relationship for plus or minus 10 years? Now, as you know, most funds are trying to, the end tail of the fund is 10 years. So most funds are trying to get in and get out within 10 years. And on average, they'd love to be in and out within 3 to 5 years. But given everything that's going on in the capital markets these days, the IPO market's very, it's not very healthy. M&A markets, they tend to be not particularly attractive. And so a lot of times, if you're forced to sell in a market like we have today, you're going to be selling at a not inconsequential discount. So once again, I think you should go into these games thinking it's going to be it could be up to 10 years.
Are there any clear red flags when looking for investors?
Number one, they don't agree with your strategy. Number two, they're telling you how to run your company before they've ever invested in it. Number three, personality-wise, you don't like hanging with them. Every single one of us has people that we actually work really well with, and then there's people that, we're okay, and then there's some people that just I don't know, I just don't work well with them. And so if you think that you're not going to just have a good, healthy working relationship with them for personality quirks or something else, then I would, I'd try not to take the money.
Well, it's like getting in a relationship with somebody, you want it to be something where the conversation is effortless and you enjoy it, because communication is the biggest thing.
And it's unguarded.
Yeah.
Right? Relatively speaking. I mean, you don't say stupid things, right? Just whatever pops through your head. But hopefully you don't even do that with your spouse, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Every now and then we're all guilty of, oops. Reminds me of a joke, which I can't share here. But it's relatively unguarded. It's relatively comfortable. It's back to character, competency and connection. A simple word is respect. You respect them, and you feel like they respect you, and you have a sense for why.
Are there other red flags, or is it mostly just come down to the respect thing, which that's forever agreements, a strategy. They're not telling you to run your business, right? They respect what's yours, and they want to help you do that. They want to advise you and so on.
Because it's funny because it almost all falls under respect.
I think there's respect, which is a state.
They respect you as a human.
Yeah,
They
these are
respect
people that you respect, and it can respect you, but
Yeah.
you just don't get on with well, right? That can be a thing.
That can be
So
a thing.
I think between those two,
yeah.
if there's respect across, I mean, if we wouldn't just make it really explicit, respect across you as an individual,
Yes.
your forever agreements for the company, your strategy, and I think how you run the business, I think would fall under those three.
Right.
So those, and
Right.
then the personal side of things, that you get on with them well,
Yeah.
and the conversation's easy, and you trust, and goes back to respect.
Yeah.
But you're not guarded around them conversationally.
Right.
And that goes both ways, right? You
Yeah.
know that if they want to say something to you, it's like, okay, yeah, they'll say it, and you trust that they're being authentic and genuine and sincere with what they're saying.
Yeah.
And that goes both ways.
Yep.
And as humans, most of us are pretty good at having a good feel for the social side of things intuitively. And you could, obviously we could do the research on this, but most founders, based on personality, the tendencies of founders, Myers-Briggs wise,
Right.
they're going to have a stronger intuition with that sort of thing. Yeah. For our audience, right? It's like, trust your gut on that, right?
Right.
Trust your gut, respect.
Yeah.
And, for starters, that's a good place.
Yeah. And then going back to, we love our assessments, right? You go back to, Ocean, Big Five, and then that they respect the fact that you're a little bit disagreeable, right? And you are going to fight for your positions. And hopefully you respect them enough to listen, even though you disagree, because you may find that strong opinions, weakly held or, mildly held or whatever they are, that every now and then, you'll change your mind because they brought a perspective that you frankly didn't have, whether it's from experience, whether it's just from an intuitive sense for something that, that you just hadn't considered.
That complement your biases well.
Exactly.
Right? And you want to find those types of people too.
Yeah.
That's good for you.
Yeah.
You want to be challenged. You
Yeah.
don't want to just be like, oh, this is great. Here's $20. Obviously not $20, but whatever. When it comes to a good metaphor for this would probably be like an online dating profile. So you want to put yourself out there as you are. Right. You want to put your best foot forward, obviously.
Yeah.
But you want to put yourself out there as you are, so
Yeah.
that you attract the right person. And so when it comes to the investor side, what things should you not do when pitching investors?
Well, obviously you shouldn't be bullshitting. There's temptations here for lots and lots of people, right? But don't say something that's not true, right? Don't even let it get kind of a little bit into the gray zone, in my opinion. But once again, I'm a harder person than I think the average bear on this one, right? If you don't know the answer to a question, say you don't know the answer to a question, right? If you make a statement and it's not true, right? And because that'll happen on occasion, right? Where maybe you embellish it a little bit. And I've been there. I don't do it very often, right? But I'm like, that's a bit of an embellishment. Let me retract it. I hear it come out of my mouth. I'm like, that's, I think it could be perceived as more than I wanted it. My words weren't perfect, right? And so you pull it back a little bit. But, this gets back to trust, right? Because, if you say something and they know that like that was not true or an embellishment, and you just sort of we're just trying to get the win. And then later on, I mean, I always, it's back to why transparency, right? Just be transparent about all this stuff and say what you know, say what you don't know. If you think something, but you're not sure, say, hey, this is what I think. I'm not sure. This is my instincts on this stuff. But just don't get yourself into a position where they're going to come back and say, what, wait a second, right? That's me, but I think it's pretty good advice.
Most of this advice applies beyond this stuff.
Yeah.
But that's useful because most people have experience in other things, and I don't think you're going to have your first type of experience with this with investors, right?
No.
So take what you've learned in those things and
Yeah,
apply it.
whether you learn this through dating or you learn this through just
I mean, even
your
partnering with
relationships.
like in a company, right?
Yeah.
Who you partner with.
Or yeah, in the workplace, or whether you learn this with your friends in school, right? You are learning these lessons very early in life.
That any sort of voluntary relationship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Family's a different thing.
Right.
It's not it's not the same dynamic.
Yeah.
But right, you want it to set the expectations early, right? Being transparent so that the relationship stays healthy over time. What are the things that you want to keep to be aware of during the relationship? So you're in there, it's healthy, you trust everybody, it's respect. Uh, but just like any relationship, you still have to put things in, right? You still have to put effort in.
Yeah.
And, it's like the marriage, so like you never stop dating kind of a thing, right?
Right.
You're always putting that in. What are the things that you need to be aware of, look out for during the relationship?
Well, one of the adages that's been around forever, right, is the old expression of good news travels slow, bad news travels fast, right? So as soon as something happens that is bad news for you, the company, and by definition, then the investor, you want to get in front of them and just say, "Hey, this just happened," and you may not have all the answers yet. You may say, "Hey, this just happened. I don't know what's going to go, what the next step is, or the next step, or the next step is, or we're still trying to figure this out. We're not sure, what happened or why, and we're still digging, etc." I'm always, this has come from years and years of experience, but I've found it so much healthier to communicate relatively swiftly within 24 hours, typically, right? If you wait a week or 2 weeks to talk to someone about something that's happened, that's a red flag. Sometimes I'll let them know like that day, but almost always within 24 hours. If there's something that I think they should be aware of is taking place or has taken place. It's either a text or it's an email, and it's, if you want to chat, let's get on. And then, you know, whether it's a 7 a.m. or a 7 p.m. or a 10 p.m. conversation, um, as a founder, as a leader, you need to make the time for that conversation. You owe it to them, is my perspective.
And what happens if you don't do that?
It harms the fabric of the relationship, right? Um, even worse is if they find out about it from someone else, right? And then it starts to, they're like, well, WTF, right?
Well, there's trust, and then you also lose control. Isn't the right word, but you lose control over the narrative,
Yeah.
right? So they're going to create a story in their head as to what happened.
And sometimes, and I'm sure some much smarter person than I am can explain all this, but it's like neuroplasticity, right? That negative thing happens and it's in their brain, and it gets wired in there a little bit, right? And they don't forget it, right? They will not forget that feeling. And, it's a little, it's like a little thing that's out there forever, or for a long time.
There's a little bit of a half-life thing to it, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, it's it will take way, way more effort to undo the thing.
Yeah.
Than it takes to just communicate.
Yeah.
Effectively.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you don't know what's happening, and that's still not a good thing, right? You want to lean into those challenges, not try to run away from it and hope it resolves, because if it's bad news like that, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. It's just only going to get worse until you lean in, deal with it.
Yeah. And sometimes this is a window for the investor. Once again, it depends on how sophisticated an investor it is, right? But sometimes these negative moments are a window into the sort of the soul of the founder.
It definitely is, right? It's a test, and you can see what happens. And
Yeah.
if you handle it well, right? Okay, bad thing happened, but you win in the eyes of the investor,
Yeah,
right?
because you were calm, cool, collective. You did the best you could with the moment that you were in. You communicated really well. I know I've mentioned this in one of the past podcasts. But, we had a relationship with a private equity sponsor. They were out of San Francisco. I remember very well. And we had, lent to several of their companies and invested alongside of them, at least 3, maybe 5 companies. And so we'd had a relationship for at least 5 years, plus or minus. And I was meeting with them and asking them how our relationship is. And he's like, I think it's good, but we don't really know. And I'm like, what do you mean we don't really know? It's never been tested. And, part of me was like, dude, right? That's like, we don't get any credit for all the work we've done. But I mean, I understand where he was coming from.
It's easy when things are stable.
Yeah.
And things are, good days, but
Yeah.
that's not what makes the relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's like how you handle the bad ones.
Yeah. Back to the very beginning of this conversation, to the extent we've laid out the things that matter and we've behaved consistently and we've all honored and respected the things that matter, and something happens that was not, has nothing to do with this. It's just life is full of,
It's inevitable.
yeah, it's inevitable. So now, okay, so now show me what you got.
You're going to have to face those things beforehand. And so, right, that applies to everything else in business, right? If you're a founder, co-founder, something that happens, like, you should communicate that there.
Yeah.
Right. And get in the good habit of when stuff goes wrong,
Yeah.
how to, at least how you react to that and how to conduct yourself.
Yeah. And, this is one of those moments in the discussion like this where you say, and you mentioned this earlier, what we're talking about doesn't just apply to founders.
It applies to anybody.
It applies to anybody, right?
It's a universal idea framed as founders to investors.
If you're watching this and you've just graduated from college or you've just started your first job, right? All this stuff is just as applicable.
Yeah, it just depends what stage you're in.
Yeah.
Right? Are you trying, because you could do this all the way down to you want to have a healthy relationship with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that don't have
Yeah.
that.
One of our 7 types of relationships.
You gotta start there.
Yeah.
So it's like you say you're gonna do something, you go, you do the thing, right?
Yeah.
You earn that trust with yourself. You keep your things in order, right?
Yes.
Within your own personal domain.
Yep.
And then, right, that extends to probably your friends and then your colleagues, right? And then the company, and then, right, you're just mastering higher levels of social complexity.
Yeah.
Right. And that's development there. But it's the same idea. It's just how many people are involved, who's involved, and so on, right? And then this is just a little bit different because, but like a marriage, right? There's legal implications here.
Yes.
And then beyond a marriage, it's legal implications for a large group of people.
Yeah.
Right. The divorce it's not as simple.
At the risk of dealing with 2 different sort of fact sets, maybe in a divorce you lose half. And you screw this up with your company and your company fails, you lose it all.
Well, and everybody else in the company loses it too.
Right.
And investors.
And you don't just lose money, but maybe you lose your reputation.
But you could argue,
Yeah.
you could argue the same thing with a divorce too, but if that falls apart.
Yeah. Both scenarios
Could get very nasty.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just, right, you have a responsibility to all of your ideal stakeholders in the professional world, right? If this goes wrong.
Yeah.
And there's a huge risk that you assume as a founder.
Yeah.
As everyone knows. That's why there's a potential reward there. But the investors know that too. And, right, they're hopefully going into this trying to steer you in the right direction because, right, that maximizes your experience here as well as theirs. And there's a return on investment there and so on. But, right, at the end of the day, it's like we're trying to help each other. This is supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship.
And you would like, going back to the very beginning here, right? You would like to have, I can only speak for me. I would like to have board members who I can be completely unguarded with. And if I have some insecurities that are playing at a certain moment in time, right? Could be insecurities about what I can't see. It could be insecurities about the level of experience needed for this one particular thing, right? Whatever it is, that instead of not talking about it, instead of hiding, instead of pretending it doesn't exist, to be, and sometimes maybe, maybe you need a coach instead of to talk about this with a coach first instead of a board member, right? But you need someone to sort of talk about this with so that you can think out loud and have, yeah, that makes sense. No, you're being silly. It's not a big deal. But just have that outside perspective, because as we've said numerous times, right, you cannot read the label from inside the jar. And when you move into one of these moments, you are in the jar.
And you want somebody who sees that as like, oh, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's address that.
Yeah.
And not like, oh, you're being weak, I'm going to take advantage of that.
Exactly. You're not only in the jar, but I'm going to put the lid on it, right? I'm going to screw it really tight. I'm going to put you on the table here, and I'm just going to watch you run out of air.
And turn the lights off and just let you die in the dark. Pleasant thoughts.
No, but hopefully that makes the point in here, right? Which is, it's important that when you are entering these relationships, that you do your best to go find relationships that you believe will be good relationships for you for a very long period of time, and that there's a foundation to that relationship that's genuine, right? And that foundation is respect and competencies and some of the things we've already talked about.
So how do you know that if you're in the right stage of your business to enter into this specific relationship, right? Because there's times where it's like, oh, do I just want a partner in this? Should I get a coach? Am I ready for investors? What do you need to feel confident in that you're ready to seek investors?
There's no right answer. Obviously, we're all uniquely different. Every single one of these situations is unique in and of itself. But it's risk reward, as we've talked about, and there's market risk and there's product risk, right? Meaning technology as well. There's execution risk, and so at what point have you evolved the business to the place where you are comfortable knowing everything you know about yourself, that you're ready to talk to people about the company? You understand where the company is, you understand where it's going, you can articulate the levels of risk that are associated with the market, with execution risk, technology risk, if that exists, right? Product evolution risk, et cetera, and you're going to have to make a gut call. Part of the reason why you probably have a lot of founders who are intuitive. You're going to have to make a gut call as to when you are comfortable going to the market talking about these things, and that you're confident that if you do take the money, there's a better than not chance, right, that you're going to be able to succeed. Now, if you could say to people, hey, by the way, this is Lucky Palmer, supposedly this is what he said, to his initial investors, hey, there's a good chance we can lose all this money, right? There's a really good chance we can lose all this money. But on the other hand, right, I think we could potentially create something extraordinary. And, here are the reasons why we could lose all this money. That's a really super healthy way of approaching it and going into it, and then saying, okay, and by the way, here's what I know, and here's what I'm really good at, and here's where I need help, and here's how I need your help in helping me address the areas where I need help, whether it's hiring people or whether it's strategic issues or access issues or whatever it is. And, just plus or minus, feeling like you're going into this game with a decent chance of winning.
And Lucky had an interesting experience with his early investors.
Yeah.
Which, that's fuel for him now. But
yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, are there any other key things that you'd like to touch on?
I think there's a chicken and the egg with this whole game, in that we're talking about one of 7 ideal stakeholders. The reality is that to attract and retain all 7 types, you do need to start getting your act together and having conviction around what you're doing, where you're going, how you're going to get from here to there. And there is no perfect answer as to, which set of ideal stakeholders you start to work on. And the reality is you will be working on several of them. You'll probably be working on hiring employees, You may have friends and family who come in as investors early on, right? You're obviously working on acquiring, employees to help you or partners to help you with this whole thing. And to do that, I think you need to have your act together across a bunch of different dimensions, including obviously the forever agreements, and not just the forever agreements, but where you think the world's going to be in 5 to 10 years and why you think you're, either uniquely or extraordinarily well positioned to be creating something that's best in class. That's fundamentally what strategy is all about, right? Strategy is about we're the best at doing something, right? It could be we're the best at serving, your local HVAC market, right? Because you figured out how to create a really good system for marketing, for customer service, for hiring and developing technicians, et cetera. And so, the game is to become one of the best, if not the best, in whatever field of business you're pursuing. And the reality is that ultimately you will win through vision, you'll win through competency, you'll win through perseverance, you'll win through anti-fragility, you'll win through constantly learning. And so getting your act together and finding something that's you're willing and, you're passionate about pursuing, finding something that you want to do, generally speaking, for 5 to 10 years that you're willing to be highly committed to, and then finding the partners that'll help you get the people you need, the ideal stakeholders you need for that particular stage of development. There's no right answer in terms of how the dominoes fall, but ultimately, whether it's employees, whether it's customers, whether it's your investors, you need to have conviction that's backed with a certain degree of competence. And so, a lot of this is not just about investors. It's about all of your ideal stakeholders.
Yeah. You got to earn your confidence. And then that's a Tom Cruise quote, don't be careful, be confident.
Because especially in the game of risk reward and innovation, right? You're going to slip and fall. So,
and when you do slip and fall, you want to make sure you have the right people along with you on that journey.
And then people who can not only help you get back up, but learn from it and take the next step forward.
But that relationship improves because of it.
Yeah. Because we've both now had a little moment and we saw how each other behaves in that little moment, and the respect's deepened.